blood eaten will give eternal life. You all realize, I wonder, that Dracula, the famed Bram Stoker character that we mostly talk about on Halloween, actually was a real person. In the 13th century, his name was Vlad Dracul, and he was from Romania, Transylvania, go figure, right? And so he did actually exist, and there was lore that his fiancée had been killed, and when he heard this, that he jumped off of this mountain, but yet said that he would live forever in death with her. So, Jesus preceded Vlad Dracul, and therefore Jesus was obviously the first vampire. Hey, don't blame me, it says it right here. Eat the flesh, drink the blood, live forever. At the very least, he was a zombie. Or a proponent of cannibalism, or... It's kind of disturbing when you think about it. No, I don't think he was any of these things. I think that there is a deeper meaning to this text. Certainly there are the texts that tell us that we can find eternal life in some celestial realm with the angels and those who we have lost. And those texts are certainly valid. But that's not what this text is about. I think that Jesus is talking about a deeper plane of existence. The divine realm, we'll call it. This place where we can be aware of the God of the universe who dwells in and around and through everything that is created, including ourselves. And I think that Jesus is telling us that there is this wellspring of life eternal, that he's not really talking about living forever, but he's talking about living a life that is in that which is eternal. God, obviously. And so he's talking about us reaching into ourselves and finding this place where the poets and the musicians and the artists receive their inspiration, this realm of the divine that is so deep in us that sometimes we find ourselves living up here. I shouldn't really say sometimes, I should say probably almost all the time. And some of us never really get down here. And so we live looking at the world through eyes of logic and reason, trying to make sense out of everything that happens around us, not really being able to put things together and make perfect sense of it all. Sometimes giving ourselves the permission to shrug things off when we don't quite get it, but never really digging deep inside of ourselves to find the divine within us, to be able to tap into the mysteries of the universe. Oliver Sacks was a famous neurologist, and he wrote a book once based on his studies of famous neurology studies. And these patients whom he encountered, the name of the book was called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat Rack. Now, this was an actual case, and a man did actually mistake his wife for a hat rack. But I want to tell you about a patient he had named Jimmy. Jimmy had a neurological condition called Korsakoff syndrome. And Korsakoff syndrome makes it so that the person goes into a state of amnesia. And so Jimmy lost 30 years of his life. Had no idea who his wife was. He'd see her every day. She'd say, "I'm your wife." He'd say, "Oh, okay." And 5 minutes later, it's gone. He was completely incapable of creating and processing new memories. And so he lived in this state of flux where every time he opened his eyes, he was in a whole new world again, recreating a new life that he really didn't know. And so Oliver Sacks went to this almost like a convent. It was a hospital where they took care of these people, and they lived there. And there were these nuns, and he was leaning on the nurse's station, and he watched Jimmy walk by, and he says to one of the nuns, he says, "You think he has a soul?" And the nun turned and looked at him, kind of disgusted by his question. And she said, "If you have any doubt that Jimmy has a soul, you just watch this." And so Jimmy walked down the hall into the chapel where they were getting ready to start Mass. And he knelt down, and he said the entire Mass liturgy perfectly, word for word. He received the Eucharist in exactly the right way. He went through all the motions, carried out all the symbols and the gestures, and said all the words exactly perfect. You see, he couldn't remember who his wife was. He couldn't remember who he was. He didn't even know where the heck he was or why he was there. But when he went into that chapel, he connected with something that wasn't up here, something that his neurological condition did not get in the way of. He connected down in here to this level, to this plane, and this dimension, if you want to call it that, where none of this mattered. Because he was able to feel so deeply as a human being, because God was within him, and he was aware of it. What would our lives look like if we could do that? Just sometimes. Just once in a while, if we could get out of this logical area and stop trying to overthink things, but if we would sometimes dig down inside of ourselves and start to experience life anew, experience things differently, that perhaps we would see things in a different way. Because in some way, we're almost seeing things the way that God does. And that we're able to get down there and get that inspiration, that new vibrance that we can have for life. I think that is what Jesus is talking about. But you know what? If we get down there and we get so deep and we start experiencing God that dwells within all of us and within all of creation, something else happens. Something else happens. There was a man who realized that these comic books kept showing up in his son's bedroom. And so he asked his son, Tommy, where'd these comic books come from? And he confessed he stole them from the comic book store. And so he sent them off to the store and said, you apologize and you take these back right now. And so he did. A few months later, he went into his room again and found another stack of comic books. And he said, Tommy, where did these come from? I know I didn't buy them for you, and I know that you don't have the money. He says, well, Dad, you remember that vacation that we took a couple months ago? I stole some at the comic book store there and brought them home with me. Well, it was too late to take them back to the store because it was so far away, so he ripped them up and he threw them in the fireplace. Well, finally, on the third time, when he discovered comic books in Tommy's room, he was at his wit's end, and he said, Tommy, you know I've never laid a hand on you. I've never touched you, except to give you a hug. But I have no choice. I'm going to have to spank you. And so he did. He spanked him 5 times, and he went out of the room, and he started weeping because he had to spank his son. Years later, Tommy and his mother were talking, and his mother said, well, I guess that spanking did the trick, because it sure cured you. You never stole comic books again. And he said, Mom, it wasn't the spanking. It was that I heard Dad weeping outside the door after he did it, and I couldn't take it. You see, when we connect with the divine that dwells in all of us, we become more interconnected with one another. We begin to see each other differently in a way that develops such a great compassion that we couldn't possibly feel any other way. I was watching a movie last night with the boys called Bless Me, Ultima. And it's about this woman who had been accused of being a witch because she had this knack for healing people. It was just amazing. And this boy is riding with his dad in the car, and the boy, people thought that he might grow up to become a priest. And he asked his dad, he said, Dad, why is there evil in the world? And his dad just looked at him and said, don't you talk about that stuff with the priests at school? I don't know. And he says, yeah, I do, but I want to hear your opinion. I want to know what you think about that. And he said, well, maybe the things that we call evil aren't really evil. It's just that we don't understand them, so we put a title on them. Maybe evil sometimes just means different from us. He says, for example, I think there's something much deeper in all of us that we don't quite understand. And Ultima, when she goes and heals people, it's because she has such a deep compassion for these people that instead of physical body touching physical body, soul is touching soul directly, and these people somehow become healed. He says, I can't explain it, Antonio, but there's something else out there that we just don't get. And sometimes we don't dare to discover for ourselves. I think he hit the nail on the head, and I couldn't believe last night I'm watching this movie. I'm like, I want that for my sermon. That's what I'm talking about. That, I think, is what Jesus is talking about in this text. Something very deep, something very beautiful, something that we don't understand and we can't ever possibly understand up here, but something that we can experience so deeply. And so Jesus says, don't just watch me. Don't just copy me. Be what I am. It doesn't mean any of us can ever be Jesus, but we can be what Jesus meant to be and what he meant for all of us to be. And that is this physical representation of the living God, God with flesh. And so when he said, eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, he wasn't telling us to be cannibals. He was telling us, take what I am into yourself and experience it for yourself. Don't witness from afar. Don't just watch and do, but be. Be what I am. Be what I have called you to be. And in being, you will experience a level of depth that you never have known before. You will see the world in a different way. You will develop compassion for people in ways you never expected. You will learn to love, and you will learn that the words that were spoken are true when it said to love another person is to see the face of God. Jesus taught us that there's something else. And if we just dare to go there, our lives will be amazingly transformed.